Good evening. Last week we had a break because of Hanukkah. Actually, tonight I'm recording this on the sixth night of Hanukkah, but by the time you see this in Motzei Shabbos on Saturday night, Hanukkah will be over. And so I wish you a good Devach, and welcome to the winter series of 2020 to 2021 entitled The Roller Coaster, the State of Israel and the Jewish People in the mid-1980s. Tonight's going to be the ninth lecture. This is actually funny. I set up the titles long ago, but when push comes to shove, I never know which way the muse will take me. And I was planning to say a few words about the Vanunu affair and then move on to something else. But guess what? Like Topsy, it grew and grew. And so tonight's lecture is being recalled Looking Glass Wars Part 2, The Age of Vanunu. And as always, I want to thank our series sponsors, the Lehman family, for generous sponsorship. I want to thank tonight's sponsors specifically. That's my good friends, the Scharfs, Dr. and Mrs. Steve Scharf, in memory of Steve's folks. Dr. Martin and Phyllis Scharf, who he reminds every year we're passionate about Israel. And so I hope they'll appreciate this. I do want to thank our tech team, as always. My son, Udalay, is organizing the whole show as he does every week this semester. And Howard Elbaum is remotely putting together the PowerPoint so expertly. And Yossi Wetstein, once again remotely, will be doing his editorial magic to enable all my gobbledygook to come out and sound like something intelligent. I do want to encourage everybody once again, anyone who's interested, to support the podcast that we do. And finally, to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. As I just said, I was originally planning to do partly about the Intifada and all the rest of it, but by the time I finished this whole business, this Vanunu business, like James Bond, it just grew and grew and got to be a whole lecture, and so I'm going with it, and that's what tonight's going to be about. We'll consider the second part of last week's talk, which is basically about the spy wars, and it's kind of interesting that the famous novelist who wrote about all these ugly and dirty spy wars, John le Carré, died the other day, and he's the one who wrote, what's it called, Little Drummer Girl, which is taking place exactly in the middle of the 1980s. And it's nothing but what he saw played out in real life with the Mossad versus the Arabs and that sort of thing, all during the 1980s, and later, of course, as well. So, without any further ado, I think I'll just get right down to the body of my remarks. I was speaking about Mordechai Vanunu last week. Before I continue and finish this spy story in the context of the 1980s, which is, as I'm trying to assert, the decade of the Israeli spy affairs, I would like to point out that Israel had been penetrated by the Russians repeatedly at the very highest level, earlier in its history and afterwards as well, though Israel does not like to read these stories today. Look, you got to just understand something. The Russians are very good at what they do, and the Chinese are better. I can prove it to you. What is the name of the Russian Secret Service? You probably know the answer. What is the name of the American Secret Service? You probably know the answer. What is the name of the Israeli Secret Service? You probably know the answer. What is the name of the British Secret Service? You probably know the answer. Okay, what's the name of the Chinese Secret Service? And don't cheat and look on Google. You don't know. That's how good they are. You don't even know that they're there. Anyway, if we go back very briefly in Israeli history, we go to the first slide. Yudale, we'll see that the guy in the middle, Israel Bear, was Ben-Gurion's close confidant. He had access to Ben-Gurion's secret files, and he was a KGB spy. Okay? He was caught, was in prison, and so forth. In the 1980s, let's go to the next one. These are all embarrassing revelations, of which there are many. In the 1980s, it was discovered that the head of the top secret lab for chemical, biological, and unconventional weapons at Nes Tziona, nobody's supposed to know about the dirty tricks that they do over there, turned out was a KGB spy, the head guy. Ivey, a Jew, Marcus Klimberg, a leading epidemiologist. If he was around today, he'd have Parnosa with the corona, and he was giving away all the goods to the Russians. What can I tell you? And he had been a spy from early childhood. Or if you wish, sometimes Israel gets the type of person you can never tell they're a spy because there's nothing in their background that would show. And it turns out in the end they just had no moral fiber and they were just stinkers. Take a look at the next guy. Sherman Levinson, you probably never heard about him. Read this. In April 83, this guy Levinson, who had had all the top jobs in the Israeli security apparatus, he entered the Soviet embassy in Thailand and Bangkok and offered to spy, hoping to earn enough money to get him out of his financial problems. There's no way, kid, anybody could foretell this. He would later admit to the Shin Bet that his sole motivation was money. Shkoyach. Levinson would spy for the Soviet Union for a total of 7 years, during which he'd be making $31,000. They ripped him off. Right? And so for a lousy $30,000, he sold ahead his soul and all the secrets of the State of Israel. Levinson was accepted and sent to Moscow for tests. He was trained in the art of coded messages, radio communications, secret rendezvous, and was told what kind of information the KGB was interested in. This in 1983. He subsequently provided his handlers with the structure of the intelligence community, providing detailed information, including names and details of units, subunits, identities of their chiefs and their modus operandi, details on the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and even provided to the KGB original documents and information on U.S. intelligence officers in contact with Israeli intelligence, and he also described the Israeli political system. In 1984, he returned to Israel and tried to rejoin Mossad. Oh my goodness, then we'd really have Kim Philby, wouldn't we? But he's rejected due to his character and traits. But in 1985, one of his friends, General Tamir, who is Director General of the Prime Minister's office, he's the guy who runs the Prime Minister's office on a day-to-day basis, appointed him Chief Security Officer on recommendations of Paris and former Old Boy networks. This new job gave him access to all classified info available to the Prime Minister of Israel, which he turned over to the KGB for $30,000. He also provided them with the structure of the Prime Minister's office. I'm just telling you, this is a person without a soul. You're handing over people to be killed by the KGB and nailed by them, all these details for, what is it, a few bucks? Even for a lot of money, but a few bucks. This is the problem you have in this ugly, dirty spy world. You understand? It just happens. You just got to understand, no Secret Service is impervious to this, and it's going to leak. That's how it goes. Now, what about the Chinese spies in Israel? I don't even know. Nobody ever caught them yet. They're all over the place. Nobody ever caught them yet. So, Vanunu, Mordechai Vanunu, is just one story among many, unfortunately. But in his case, I think it's interesting because he was no spy. He was no professional. He was a misguided ideologue who didn't realize he was playing with fire, which is strange because he worked in Dimona. Okay? But life is strange. When he refused to serve in the army during the Lebanon War in 1982, and he became increasingly vocal about his anti-Israel views, he was fired. Shkoyach. I mean, he worked at the top secret base, and now they're firing you. According to him, he quit when they wouldn't promote him. You know the old line, you didn't fire me, I quit. Now you have an interesting situation. There's a guy walking around who possesses the most sensitive information regarding national security, but who hates the country. In Russia, or someplace like that, they just shoot him or shut him up. But not so in Israel. Israel is a democratic country. So what do? You hear what I'm saying? I'm not talking about a terrorist, and I'm not talking about a spy. I'm talking about a blabbermouth. Okay, what do? This had never happened before. Israel had no experience on how to handle such a situation. True, he did sign a secrecy contract which contained criminal provisions. But what do you do if a guy like this makes Yeridah, if he moves out of Israel? In Vanunu's case, he departed the country for a 2-year trip around the world, which, by the way, a lot of Israelis do. And it speaks to his state of mind. He was looking to get out of Israel and see the world. He went to the Far East. He tried Buddhism. Well, big deal. A lot of Israelis do that. Let's go to the next one. Do you remember when Ben-Gurion, all people went, he was considering, getting into Buddhism, and he spent a couple of weeks in a monastery in the time of Unu, back around 1961 or so. There's Ben-Gurion in that semi-Hasidic outfit, or whatever you want to call it, fairy outfit, in a monastery, a Buddhist monastery. A yeshiva he wouldn't step into, but a Buddhist monastery. Anyway, eventually, by 1986, our guy, Vanunu, ended up in Australia, where he joined what I would recall a very liberal and anti-nuclear Christian shtibel, or maybe Christian chabura, finding the kind of small-knit community someone with his personality craved. He lived in the apartment owned by the shtibel, like we have in Maishol. He got a job driving a cab for an employer who belonged to that shtibel. You see what I'm saying? The Christians have the same thing sometimes, like a small Hamish shul. So he went to a Hamish Christian operation. He was through with Judaism. He was through with Jews. He was looking for something different. Now I want to tell you something. That's his right. As a rabbi, I don't think it's a great idea, but that's his right. Problem is, what you open your big fat mouth for about national security secrets. You want to live a new life in a completely different way on the other side of the world in Australia with Geisha friends. Okay, every person is entitled to make his or her choices. But what do you do with the top secret information that you possess? Now, the problem was, a guy like this is a walking intelligence time bomb because of two things. Number one, the knowledge of Dimona that he carried in his head, because I told you last week he broke all the compartmentalization, so he knew the place inside out, which is dangerous. Plus, there are 57 photos he illegally and surreptitiously took of Dimona, which he retained on his person, now located in Australia. And Israel, by the way, was clueless. They didn't know he had done this. Here's a guy, like you say, davening next to you in your Christian shtibel or whatever it is, who happens to have in his small apartment, they're still a loser, small apartment that belongs to the church that he's living in. Here's a roll of film. What's in the roll of film? Well, you got the most sensitive national security information about the Israel A-bomb program and H-bomb program that exists. These photographs, take a look at the next one. These photographs were dynamite. And maybe that's the wrong word to use. This is one where you have Vanunu's photo of the control room of the Plant 2 plutonium separation plant. This is deep, heavy stuff of how you pull apart these materials to make a bomb. Most damaging revelation was Vanunu took photos of Israel's H-bomb. I didn't say the A-bomb. H-bomb. Nobody knew he had H-bomb. A thermonuclear weapon is a lot bigger than an A-bomb. You know that. If they would have dropped an H-bomb on Hiroshima, it would have gone much farther than Hiroshima, you see? And mamish nobody would be left. Nobody. And Israel had him. Mind you, listen closely. We have many people in our own frum communities who keep in their heads top secret information about the national security of the United States of America. I have no doubt some of them are among my viewers of my lecture tonight. As long as they keep their big fat mouth shut, as they're required to do, ain bayah. The problem was, Vanunu could not refrain from yakking at chavura dinners and kiddishes, whatever they had over there, picnics. You've got to be friends with people. Somebody says, what'd you do years ago? A guy said, well, I was a cab driver. Another guy said, well, I was an athlete. Another one said, I tried a little acting over here. I worked in a law office. Oh, me? I worked with the H-bombs of Israel. 8 floors under the ground, derech hagav. Okay? Now, if that information just remains among the people at the Kiddush, once again, ain't bayah. But it never stays confined to the group. Because we have a rule, chavra isli, v'chavra isli. One person yaks, and pretty soon it spreads. So it's not only among Jews that people have big mouths. A South American journalist, who seems to have been a little bit of a scuzzball, heard about Vanunu's unique knowledge of Israel's top secret nuclear program, and as a journalist, he saw this as a moneymaker. You can make $1 million on that. I'll be honest with you, and be honest with yourself. If I'm sitting there at a kiddush or a picnic, and somebody says, you have info that you could sell and make $1 million, I could do with $1 million. Yeah, I could do something with that. What about you? As this Shadchan, this journalist whose name was Oscar Guerrero, he approaches Newsweek magazine, but is disbelieved. It is the most unlikely story. Here you are in Australia. So I just met somebody at a Chavurah or a Christian fellowship operation, and he worked at the very heart of Israel's H-bomb program. You got to admit, it sounds a little bit. And second of all, this is a South American journalist. That itself tells you a lot. And so they next approach a London tabloid, the Daily Mirror, very famous paper, but they're turned down by the Daily Mirror, even though usually they're into scoops. but for a very different reason. Now, my friends, the story mamish goes to James Bond, or maybe the Protocols of Zion. You see, the owner of the Daily Mirror at that time was one of the strangest characters, remarkable and repulsive, of the 20th century. It's better than fiction. Let's go to the next slide. I'm talking about Robert Maxwell, who was Jewish. As you can see at the bottom, his real name was Chaim Benjamin Hach, but he's originally from Czechoslovakia, I kid you not far from Munkac. That says a lot. And he ended up in, he was a little schlepper. He survived Hitler. He made it to England. He fought in the British Army, things like that. And after the war, he engaged in a career in the, shall I say, the print business. Eventually became a billionaire, zillionaire. And his wife is not Jewish. As you can see at the top, he lived the glamorous life and was a real, like I say, real obnoxious character. And his wife is not Jewish, I say again. And so he didn't live anything Jewish, and he reinvented himself as Robert Maxwell. Sounds better in Parliament than Chaim Benjamin Hach. You understand? But wait a minute. How come when he died, and by the way, he fell off a yacht, okay, in the Canary Islands. He just fell off a yacht. It was, and died suddenly when he was about to have a big lawsuit, okay? Look at the talus at the bottom. The state of Israel gave him a burial on Har Zayim. What? His family, who are not Jewish, they're the ones there with yarmulkes and stuff like that. What? Okay? So, Robert Maxwell, by the time we're talking about in the 80s, is a newspaper tycoon, a media mogul. He also, and I haven't figured this all out, and I don't think anybody has, he has ties with the KGB, with MI6, and with the Mossad. Okay? It's possible, being that he's from Czechoslovakia, he claimed he's one of the people that helped Israel get the weapons from Czechoslovakia in 1948. Maybe it's true, or maybe it's not. These guys are experts in inventing lies about their past. He definitely, though, had close ties in one way or another to the Mossad. All I can tell you is, as you see at the bottom, the guy at the top doesn't look like the guy at the bottom. Agreed? And the guy at the bottom, what do you call it? When they had the funeral, again at the Har Zayim or something like that, Yitzhak Shamir, the Prime Minister of Israel, in Paris, to give a hesped. He did a lot of great deeds for the state of Israel. What the heck are they talking about? I told you, it said James Bond. It's John le Carré. This is a world of spooks. We don't know what's going on. And our guy, Oscar Guerrero, on behalf of Mordechai Vanunu, they go to this guy, the media tycoon, and they say, we have top secret stuff on Israel. Okay? Now, when Robert Maxwell said this, let me have copies of the photos, and then I'll decide if we want to run the story. Of course, what does he do? He immediately goes and gives the copy of the photos to the Mossad. The Mossad has a heart attack. They seriously freak out. They had no idea that this existed. And this is like their worst nightmare, agreed? Your most important and dangerous national secrets. This guy took pictures and nobody stopped him. And he's in Australia. A complete breakdown of the Israeli security system. Okay? Meanwhile, the indefatigable Guerrero, the South American guy, goes to the competitor. If it won't be the Daily Mirror, I'll go to the Sunday Times, which is run by Maxwell's competitor. Let's go to the next one. The famous Rupert Murdoch. Okay? So, if you know anything at all about the British tabloid business, not that you should, there used to be these, mogul wars, circulation wars between these big top press barons. And Rupert Murdoch said like this, this is interesting. And so he sends his most important reporter, the guy on the left, Peter Hunem, and famous names, okay? And he says, listen, I'm putting you to look into the story because the Sunday Times had been caught with their pants down when they believed Hitler's diaries. Did anybody remember that? A guy sold him a load of goods. He said, I got Hitler's secret diaries. And they ran it like it was real and turned out to be a fake. So they didn't want to get faked out again. And so he did a regular thing. He sent his top reporter and he said, go investigate this Vanunu business. And so they fly to London where Vanunu spills his guts and gave away the whole crown jewels. Okay, let's go to the next one. This is the big reporter at that time. He looks like somebody I know. And let's go to the next one. Look at this. The Sunday Times was wary of being duped, especially in light of the recent Hitler Diaries hoax. As a result, the newspaper insisted on verifying Vanunu's story with leading nuclear weapons experts, including U.S. guy Theodore Taylor and British guy Frank Barnaby, who agreed that the story was factual and correct. In addition, a reporter named Pragnell was sent to Israel to find people who knew Vanunu and verify his story. He went to Vanunu's backstory, meeting people at Ben-Gurion University who identified him from a photograph, as well as meeting neighbors and others who confirmed he'd been working at Dimona. See, they're going to run this, and they're going to say like this is not a fake. We've done our journalistic legwork. This is really what Israel has. Vanunu gave detailed descriptions of lithium-6 separation required for the production of tritium and essential ingredients of fusion-boosted fission bombs, while both experts concluded Israel might be making such single-stage boosted bombs. Vanunu, whose work experience was limited in material production, gave no specific evidence that they were making two-stage thermonuclear bombs, like neutron bombs. My goodness, this is the front end of the technology in the late 1980s. Vanunu described the plutonium processing used, gave a production rate of 30 kilograms a year, and stated Israel used about 4 per weapon. So in other words, you start doing the numbers, it was possible to estimate Israel had enough for 150 nuclear weapons and maybe more. That means Israel would have, it's just interesting, Israel would have 200 or something like that, 150, 200 A bombs and H bombs. Whoa, that's different than having 5 or 6, okay? Now, I'm simply saying this guy spilled the beans. This presented Israel in 1986, with Shimon Peres as prime minister, with an unforeseen problem. And not only Israel. Let me explain. What does a country do with its citizens who have legal access to classified, highly classified information? I mean, it's part of life. You have employees working for the United States government, for example, or governments around the world. I mean, do you keep them in jail for the rest of their life and say you can only stay in the work area and never go home? I mean, you know that's not true, right? How do you, I'm talking about what are security procedures? How do you make sure that your employees aren't spilling the beans, okay? Now, if you're a totalitarian country, they can keep you from going outside the country until you die, right? You know, does anybody remember the Russians used to say, oh, we can't let the Soviet Jews out because some of them have access to the nuclear stuff, which was true of about 4 or 5 of them, you see? But the idea behind that is you can't let somebody with top secret access to secret information running around the world. What do you do if you're the U.S., England, Israel, the country? I mean, do you really have a law or something like that that your employees for the government, who are many, mamas can't leave the country? If you're a democracy, and if someone no longer worked for you, do you forbid him and her from traveling abroad? Stell sich vor, as they say in the yeshivas. Imagine somebody who worked in imagine an academic who got security clearance and worked on a sensitive project for the CIA, I don't know, something like that, or the nuclear, let's say for 3 years. And then the grant ran out, and the guy no longer works for the U.S. government, okay? What, are they monitoring him till the day he dies? He can't leave the country? He can't, leave New York area? Yeah, I mean, it doesn't work like that. So you can go abroad. A guy can visit England. He can visit Europe. He can visit the Middle East. Once abroad, and especially what happens if you move abroad, if you permanently move abroad, how can you control what the guy says? How do you control to whom he blabs? I mean, how do you do this? How do you manage the problem? Remember, Vanunu was not communicating with a foreign power. He was not in communications with a country at war with Israel. He simply put it on the front page of the world news. Okay, let's go to the next one. There you have it. Sunday Times revealed the secrets of Israel's nuclear arsenal. He didn't give it away to the Russians. He gave it away, period. Okay? So what exactly do you call that? Do you call it espionage? You see you follow my point? Do you call it dealing with the enemy? Now, obviously, when Israel came in, Israel denied everything, of course. But let's go to the next one. We have a rule. Nikarim divrei emes. Once you read it, you could tell he's telling the truth. Okay? Because it was true. Now comes the most fascinating part of the story to my mind. The international reaction. Now, really, what might have happened was the following. Israel's not supposed to have nuclear weapons. It never signed the Proliferation Treaty. It was not a member of the United Nations body connected with that. There are laws in the United States which say you can't give any money to a country that's building nuclear weapons. The U.S. government could easily simply said, oh, now we know that Israel has A-bombs. We can't give them any money. Israel would close down for business, especially in 1980s. Especially in 86, I told you before, Shimon Peres is trying to reform the economy. Basically, the economy was on life support, depending on George Shultz giving them money, Ronald Reagan giving money. They're just cut off. What about the United Nations? So like this, if Israel doesn't give up all the weapons, we'll kick them out of the UN. Why don't we impose, the European Union could have said we're going to impose international sanctions. Hey, they do it to Iran. Huh? They do it to North Korea. You say this part of international policy to oppose nuclear proliferation. I get that and I agree with that. And so does everybody, except Israel. Meaning, except when it comes to the case of Israel. Why are you making an exception for the case of Israel? That's not fair. You see what I'm saying? That kind of thing should have happened. And now it's out in the Sunday Times. And no matter how many people deny it, the world could say like this, let's send inspectors and go to where Vanunu says we should go. Not be fooled by what's in the front, but go downstairs and see what's really there. Here's the funny part. When this story came out, Lamaisa, let's go to the next one. Nothing happened. Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Helmut Kohl of Germany, Francois Mitterrand of France, all the leaders, they didn't do anything. This is shocking. But to my mind, it's very interesting. Why? I think several reasons suggest themselves, and all of them are interesting. First of all, there's what you call the old boy network, which means I don't want to help a guy open up the Israeli stuff because it could happen to us. Right? If we applaud someone who's a whistleblower on the Israeli nuclear program, what do we do if somebody comes who's a whistleblower on the British, the French, the American, and the other programs? After all, you're saying, oh, he's fighting against nuclear proliferation. So we don't want to have, you think I'm making this up? Go to the next one. Who's Julian Assange? Right? Isn't he the Vanunu of the 20th century? Besides taking down Hillary Clinton in the 2016 elections, besides that, right? Didn't he give away, I don't know what, and the U.S. doesn't want to kill him? He's a Vanunu. And the U.S. doesn't say, oh, he's helping in the cause of anti-proliferation. There are peace groups that are supporting Assange around the world. And the U.S. is furious over this. Now, the whole phenomenon of whistleblowers unilaterally spilling secret national security info in the media raises interesting questions about the competing dynamics of, number one, the requirements of national security, which presumably the public supports in the interests of their own safety against enemy and terrorists. I mean, I'm an American citizen. I don't want all the secrets of the American, military and all the national security being blabbed in the public, because then some idiot Osama bin Laden type will use it against us and hurt me. So I don't say them like this. Oh, Katz wants to know what's really going on behind the closed door. It's okay. I can live without that. I want the country safe. That's all I want. You see? And number two, there is, competing against that, the other dynamic, which is that there is always, and understandably, a desire of the public to pierce the veil of deception practiced upon them by politicians and public officials. If you know anything about the nuclear business, there's all kind of mistakes and terrible things they've done over the last 50, 60 years. They've exposed workers to radiation. Bombs have gone off in the wrong place. Areas have become poisoned, and the politicians try to hide it and lie about it. And so what do? Do you open everything up? Or do you keep everything closed? Or what do you do? I'm simply saying it's not push it. I mean, I'm asking you, are you in favor of outing the emails of a politician? That's what you do now, person says they're in favor of this, and then we find the emails, they say they didn't mean it. Okay, so it's salacious. I mean, it's interesting for me to see a hypocrite. The public always likes to see hypocrisy. You say one thing, you mean another. Clinton, what do you call it? Biden, Trump, all these guys. On the other hand, am I comfortable with the fact that private communications are now easily exposed on the internet? Isn't that called the right of privacy? Do you want a gentleman's private papers, as they used to call them, to be sacrosanct? I mean, I kind of do. I mean, let me put it this way. I don't mind if your emails get exposed, but I don't want my emails to get exposed. You see what I'm saying? You hear the problem, okay? Now, I think, by the way, that this is actually one of the larger issues of our time. Don't you agree? And I think this issue will grow with time. And it'll be one of the biggest issues of the 20th century. It already is. You see the public, and I don't follow this stuff closely. Public is raising questions about Google and about Microsoft, all these other, I don't know, whatever you call them, all these mega, internet situations, because they're controlling your privacy. I think we all know this now. Anything you say, it's like a double push. Anything you say in the email or anything like this is open for everybody to see. Even though it violates the most basic rule of personal space and privacy that's supposed to be guaranteed in the Constitution of the United States, for example. But that's how it goes. And I think, by the way, that in the light of the fact that this is one of the big issues of the 21st century, the Vanunu case, although it took place in the late 20th century, will be viewed as a harbinger of this entire phenomenon, and that it will therefore be studied closely by historians, political scientists, and other academics and researchers. So all this, I think, is one reason why the Western powers did not act on the Vanunu revelation. It's fascinating. The guy spilled the beans, it was all true, and nobody did anything. Bichlal, Israel was lucky in those years because they had Western leaders, a good constellation of Western leaders. They were fairly pro-Israel. And that Shimon Peres was the prime minister of Israel, and Shimon Peres has his pluses and minuses. One of his biggest pluses was that he had excellent personal relations with each of the national leaders. Take a look, for example, at Shimon Peres with Margaret Thatcher. Here's a speech she gave for him when he visited her at Downing Street, and she gave a dinner. She said, "Let me extend a warm welcome to number 10 Downing Street to the Prime Minister of Israel, Peres. We're delighted to have you here and wish you a successful stay." And look at the next paragraph. I'm not sure, this is Margaret Thatcher with that understatement. I'm not sure whether all our guests here tonight know that the last time you fell in our hands was in 1945. We caught you on a camel in a restricted military area and locked you up for 2 weeks. In British Palestine. As everyone knows, she goes on to say, to have been locked up by the British is essential for a successful political career in many countries of the world. I'm so glad we got you off to a good start. That's a typical British understatement. Keep going to the next one. History doesn't relate what happened to the camel. In other words, only what happened to Paris. Israel is small in geography but large in history. I'm quoting you Margaret Thatcher. I like to think that this is one of the main characteristics which draws us together. I would remind you of what the Dean said. The nations which have put mankind and posterity most in their debt have been small states. Israel, Athens, Florence, and Elizabethan England. That's an interesting chevra. We also share a taste for debate, and I remember when Israeli Prime Minister said, "We have 3 million citizens who think they're prime ministers. The difference between them and me is everyone thinks he knows much more than I do." And Margaret Thatcher concludes, "Just recently, I've rather had the same feeling." Right? Everybody thinks they know better than I do. It speaks of very warm personal chemistry. That's very good. It happened in 1986 like this, because when the Vanunu blows up, she's not going to say to Israel, "Oh, you have nuclear weapons? I'm shocked." All the rest of it. So it's just very interesting. As for the president of France, who really could have made a case, he's best friends with Paris. Look, they're going on summer vacation together. Okay? And the leader of Germany, Shimon Peres, made his business to be close friendship with Helmut Kohl. Okay? Now, I'm simply pointing this out because with our hindsight today, let's go to the next one. What would have been the U.S. reaction to the Vanunu revelations had these guys been in office? You read, I'm sure, what happened. John Brennan, former CIA head, he said, "I'm shocked that Israel killed this Fakhrizadeh guy," whatever his name was, in Iran. "Oh, it's terrible." Wait a minute, let me get this straight. The guy was the head of the Iranian bomb situation. They're trying to build a bomb to wipe out Israel. Israel took him out, assuming that they did. And this guy said, "Oh, is it shocking? Really? Really?" And he didn't go try to kill the CIA, I don't know how many people. And imagine with Jimmy Carter, oh my Lord. Then the United States, you have to understand, what if the President of the United States officially informs the Congress, "I now have information, Israel has a bomb." Then all those laws which say the country can't get any money at all if they're building bombs, Israel shut down. You see? And so it was a good mazel, you might say, for Israel. They had the right cast of characters and the positions of high power in the mid-'80s. Now, as fascinating as his silence is in terms of the old boy network, what is far more fascinating is what this silence and lack of reaction in 1986 indicated about how the world really viewed Israel. Here I refer to the larger questions that historians in the future will one day marvel at, in my opinion. Look, there really is a sincere non-proliferation movement out there in terms of nuclear weapons. I'm in favor of non-proliferation. I don't want every country in the world to start getting A-bombs, H-bombs, because they're going to use them. It is not exactly true that the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq was a waste. Remember, they said, well, we came there and Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction. Bush went to war. Let's go to the next one. Remember, Bush went to war. He said, oh, we got to take out Iraq because they're building weapons of mass destruction. Then the Americans came there, as we all know, notoriously, and there weren't any. Okay? Therefore, people, we know now. There weren't any, but they get the plans. And as soon as the Americans were out, if it was up to Saddam Hussein, when the Americans are out and when the sanctions are finally over, notice he'll say, listen, search the country from top to bottom, inside, outside, and you'll find nothing. Once the pressure's off, then they'll pull out the plans and start building again 10 times as much. I actually found the other day, there's like a little BBC dramatization of Saddam Hussein, because his family is like from the mafia and a half, okay? And it's a British thing, and it's fairly accurate. And you'll see over here, Saddam Hussein talking to his son-in-law, and he's basically saying, let them see what they want and make sure all the bombs are gone and all the nuclear stuff is gone and destroyed. And don't worry, keep the plans, and one day we'll start it all over again. Watch this.
The inspectors suspect everything. That's their job. But they can't prove anything.
Good. When the UN lift the sanctions and the oil money starts flowing again, I want to rebuild our strategic capabilities bigger and better than before.
We will be the Arab superpower once again, Your Excellency.
So while you destroyed existing chemical, biological, and long-range weapons, you retained the designs and engineering details so they can be built at a future date.
Yes. We hid the blueprints, computer disks, microfiches, all materials that would help us restart the weapons program as soon as we could.
So all those months, years of visits to Iraq, all those inspections, all those meetings, you were lying to the UN.
I'm shocked. Right? By the way, this is going on in Iran right now. We have no weapons. You know that, right? It's all peaceful. And everybody knows this is a lie. Now, the nuclear non-proliferation... So what I'm trying to say is like this. So when America came in and took out Saddam Hussein, and I know a lot of mistakes were made, and we got involved in that, like another Vietnam. I know all the stuff that happened. But looking back, it is a fact that George Bush Jr. destroyed the Iraqi nuclear option, at least for a lifetime, for many years. Because if they hadn't dismantled the Ba'athist regime, I know they tried to build another Iraq and it hasn't worked out well. If they hadn't done that, these guys would have resumed building the A-bombs in a smarter and stealthier way. And today, in 2020, we might be looking at a world that has an Iraq with nuclear weapons and totally ready to use it, as you and I know. Now, history is kind of funny how it's going to judge, in my opinion, the George Bush Jr. war in Iraq. Let's go to the next one. When this is what persuaded Gaddafi to drop his weapons program. He was trying to build an A-bomb also. He just got scared he'll get invaded. As we all know today, two of the top crises in the world that cannot be solved. Let's go to the next one. What do you do with this guy in North Korea who is building the weapons as we speak? And missiles that can deliver the weapons against the United States. Trump didn't stop him. Obama didn't stop him. Bush and Clinton didn't stop him. Nobody's stopping them. Right? And by the way, speaking of the devil, let's go to the next one. Is anyone stopping Iran? We all know that they're building nuclear. Now, Trump, he tried to do the sanctions and all that, but is anyone really trying to stop Iran? Is the United Nations, kicking them out of the UN or something like that? Let's go to the next one. That's Obama announcing the Iran deal. What was it, in 2015? And next to him is Joe Biden. And on the right side is the next Secretary of State, Blinken, all of whom are in favor and are in favor of the Iran deal. Even though everybody knows that they're building an A-bomb and they're only going to use against Israel. My point is that North Korea and Iran preoccupy world politics at the highest levels. By contrast, Israel has had a bomb, a program, since the 1950s. And they've had actual bombs since the 1960s. And this has been public knowledge since the late 60s. Let's go to the next one. By the 60s, everybody knew that what you're seeing over Demone is not really a textile factory, the way Ben-Gurion called it. Okay? In all this time, in the 60s, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and from 2000 to today, to 2020, neither the U.S. nor the Soviet Union has chosen to make a stink over this. I mean, that's incredible. Nor has the UN or other international actors, nor even the Arab states. Once in a while they squawk about it. There's never been anything serious to try to get rid of the Israeli nuclear program. That's extraordinary. Why? Why? In my opinion, this is all a reflection of a remarkable fact. Despite the demonization rhetoric that Israel is considered the worst country ever existed, and much worse than Nazi Germany, blah, 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 all that stuff, everyone knows and knew that Israel is a rational actor who would never use a nuclear weapon, except, as you see in the next slide, as a Samson option, as a last resort, right? Just like Samson, when he had nowhere else to go, he was dying, so he took down the Philistines with him. So the idea behind the nuclear reaction is, if the Arabs ever gang up, or Iran, or somebody else, is going to wipe out Israel, we'll take them down with us, right? Or we'll try to stop them before. But b'diavad, we'll take them down with us. By the way, that is the reason the United States has A-bombs. That is the reason Russia has A-bombs, and China, and all the others. As a last resort, not as a first resort. Now, in the case of the other countries, one can challenge the logic of the Samson option. After all, what kind of a plan is it if everyone, including your own country, gets killed? If you're old enough as I am, you'll probably remember some of these slogans. Well, there used to be a machlokes. Is it better red than dead or better dead than red? You understand? Now, those who said better red than dead, they're in favor the U.S. should not make any more weapons. And if Russia takes over, it's better red than dead. Right? If Russia takes over America, it's not good, but it's better than the other alternative where we all die. And then you had the other guys on the other side, the right-wingers, said better dead than red. Right? Now, what does all that reflect? Right? It reflected the fact that really the physical survival of the American people was not necessarily in question. Most people didn't think Russia was going to come in if they took over, God forbid. If Russia took over America, they're going to kill 200 million people. Okay? They would, subjugate them like they did Eastern Europe. Let's go to the next one. Patrick Henry said, give me liberty, give me death. Really? A lot of people say like this. Really? You understand? Frankly, I'd rather have life. You could make such an argument, okay? It's all based on the idea no one's out to kill all the Americans, to exterminate them in the Hitler way, or kill all the Russians or all the French or anybody else. But, in the case of Israel, they are out to kill them. Genocide is on the table. What would Arafat or Saddam do if he conquered Israel? God forbid. Remember, Hitler is today still a popular figure in the Arab world. As the only country in the world publicly threatened with genocide, other nations could understand the unique need of Israel for a weapon that could threaten genocide back to the would-be killers. You want to wipe me out? I got something now that can wipe you out. Okay? And you think it's shocking? I don't care where you're shocked. You want to kill me? So I'm going to kill you. If you're shocked, you're just a hypocrite. Since the nations that called for Israel's destruction, and still do, are not punished or even boycotted for doing so, the message to Israel is clear. No one will intervene to save you. Look at the next one. Right? This is from recently, May. You see this all the time. Iran's supreme leader calls for Israel's destruction in Twitter. Huh? Wait, you're calling that my country should be destroyed? Is that what you're saying? And let me ask you a question. Look at the bottom. Is Iran expelled for the UN for saying that? For calling for the destruction of Israel a member state of the United Nations? Now, if they did it for any other country, they'd be everybody outraged, and you get kicked out of the UN. But Israel's okay. So what does this mean to Israel? What does it tell Israel? It tells Israel there's only one person you can rely on. Only yourself, and only with a ultimate weapon of mass destruction. This goes back, let's go to the next one. I talked about this in the past, to the very beginning in Eisenhower's time when the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission was Louis Strauss, who was a super patriotic American Jew and had earlier in his life been anti-Zionist, but after the Holocaust, he realized that Israel is the only last hope of the Jewish people. And when Eisenhower started getting info from the, the U-2 flights, the CIA, that Israel is starting to build a nuclear and he was about to go ballistic, Louis Strauss, whom Eisenhower held in the very highest regard, he venerated him. He told Eisenhower privately, he says, listen, you know, Mr. President, Israel alone is the only country constantly threatened with genocide, and you know it. There's no other member of the United Nations that's actually threatened being destroyed. And Eisenhower didn't say anything, but shtika kahotab. He basically said, yes, you're right. You know, Israel's a special case. So all these are organized around the idea, I'm against A-bombs for everybody, but Israel's a special case. Now, that used to work once upon a time. I don't know if it would work today. So because the world understood Israel's need for nuclear weapons, and because the world trusted Israel to never use those weapons, the world had acquiesced in Israel's game of denial. It's about 60 years now. You know, they got the first A-bomb rolled off the plane around 1966. So, 55, 60 years now. Everyone knows they're there, but they all pretend they don't. Which is, I'll tell you again, future historians, 50 years now, 100 years now, will be saying, how did Israel do it? Okay, now, in 1986, 20 years after the first A-bomb rolled off the line, this guy Mordecai Vanunu is now spilling the beans in the British press. The question was, what's Israel going to do about it? Many in the Mossad, and not only in the Mossad, so I guess bump him off, kill him. We don't usually do that, but the guy's mamish a threat to the national security. He's doing things that are unconscionable as far as national security is concerned. And so kill him because, you know why? Dead men tell no tales. Okay? He brought it himself. I might even say that one of the top journalists in Israel, who's not a Mossad guy, Dan Margalit, let's go to the next one. He was close with Shimon Peres, and he said, you got to kill this guy. Dan Margalit, in other words, a liberal reporter, as we would say today, tells the Prime Minister of Israel, this guy's such a danger, you got to kill him. Okay? Now, it's very interesting. At the end of the day, Israel is a nation of laws, and there has to be a trial. Vanunu, they feel, kill him. He must be brought to justice for treason or violation of the Official Secrets Act. But brought to justice means brought to justice. It doesn't mean you kill him. Let's go to the next one. Shimon Peres made a famous statement. He said, the state of Israel doesn't kill Jews, which is very, very interesting. What he's basically saying is like this. After Hitler, Israel don't kill Jews. Arabs we kill. Terrorists we kill. Right? And Dan Margalit said like this, what are you, a racist? Doesn't matter who they are. Right? That's racism already. It's the question whether it's a threat to Israel, whether it's a threat to the survival of the country. This guy's a threat to the survival of the country. I understand the logic there, and this would be a wonderful play for TV or something like that. And Shimon Peres is coming from Baich, from Kishkes. And he says, Israel doesn't kill Jews. You understand? It's part of the Jewish ethos. It's a good thing of the post-Holocaust, late 20th century. It reminds me, I remember a couple years ago, I don't know if you recall this, in the 73 war, the Syrians got a hold of a guy who was a wonk and a nerd, and he had a photographic memory, and he was captured on the Golan Heights, on Hermon, and it was a Dati guy, and he was a loser, as we say today, and the Syrians played him, and he gave away all the secrets. He did so much damage to Israel. They convinced him Israel was destroyed. He gave away everything, the codes. It was just terrible, the damage that he did to the state of Israel. And then the war was over and he was returned to Israel. And the army said, this guy Misa, what you can do in the army. And if he's not going to be killed, it should be life imprisonment. He did, and they weren't wrong in the sense, he did such damage to Israel that's unbelievable. And Golda Meir said like this, he's the only son of Holocaust survivors. That's not what we do. Just leave him alone. He'll have to live with what he did himself, knows he knows what he did wrong, and we're not going to. I'm not going to embitter the lies of his parents at this stage of their life that their only son should be in jail, and that's it. So at the end of the day, Israel's a funny place, and they're not going to kill Vanunu. What Peres really means is the guy's not a terrorist in a classic sense. You know, that's an interesting point, by the way. Israel, as you read from all these books that are coming out now, does believe in killing terrorists. They're not one of these bleeding heart situations where you say, like, oh, the guy, you have to understand where he's coming from, all the rest of it. You're trying to kill me, I'll kill you. Habola hargo, hashkim hargo. If they can. If they can. However, what do you do with this situation? The guy's not a terrorist, but he's mamash a threat to the country. Now, Mordechai Vanunu was not going to return on his own in Israel to face trial. He had actually turned his back on Israel. He had turned his back on Judaism, the whole thing. Now, I want to point out, he did this honestly out of conviction. Again, as somebody who's Jewish, as a rabbi and all the rest of it, I deplore his choice in life. But that was his choice in life. He honestly said, Judaism not worked out for me. Christianity's working out better. I just want to reinvent myself as somebody who's not Jewish, live in a Christian environment, et cetera, et cetera. So he has the right to do that. Okay? So since that's the case, he's got to be brought back to Israel against his will. No, he's kidnapped. Okay. So then Shimon Peres, I guess, if that's what we need to do, let me make a phone call to the Mossad. That they know how to do. How to kidnap people and stuff like that. Right? Then it becomes not a question of morals or anything like that. It's a professional question, you understand? So the Mossad takes this as a professional situation. So they did what spy services always do. They developed a big personal file on him, interviewed everyone they could and built up the file, and then they showed it to their psychologists and shrinks and trying to analyze the file, and basically it concluded the guy's a loser type, particularly with girls. Okay? So then it's simple. You get what they call a honey trap. Just get a pretty girl, a femme fatale, just to twinkle her eyes at him, they'll follow her anywhere. That's how they psyched him out. That was their evaluation. You see, it is a dirty secret, but very well known, so it can't be much of a secret, that the spy world, and John le Carre just died, it's all ugly, right? Let's go to the next one. There's all the difference in the world between the world of the Torah and the world of espionage. In the world of Torah, you say, Al Shlosha Dvar Ma'olam Omein, Al HaTorah, Ve'al Avoda, Ve'al Gemilas Chasam. The world stands on Torah, on divine service, and on charity and kindness to others. But let's go to the next one. In the spy world, Al Shlosha Dvar Ma'olam Omein, on money, on sex, and power. You can get to anybody. This is the KGB, the CIA, any group, the Cucamonga secret police. This is what they've learned as ABC in the course. Because unfortunately it's true, you go for human weakness, and everybody, you can either get to them through money. Look, the other guy sold out the whole ship for $30,000. Give me a break. Or through sex things, or through, girl things. Or, I don't know, or maybe, the guy's into gay or something. Or power. Okay, that works on everybody. And so, they analyze this guy and they say, it's not number one, it's not number three, it's number two. Okay? Now, so they spring a trap. It's 1986. He's in London, having just, given the newspaper. Now let's go to the next one. And while he's in a store or something like that, I forget how I read it, he just happened to bump into, this girl who turned out to be very nice to him, young and pretty. She was 25 years old. And, they just struck up a conversation. Well, land sakes, it turned out to develop into a romantic relationship. You understand? See, I wonder how that happened. He was too dumb to realize he'd been set up. Okay? This is Cheryl Bentov, the Mossad femme fatale. This American girl from Florida, born in 1960, grew up, I think, in Orlando area, Florida area, something like that, and very Zionistic. And after high school, she went for a year to Israel, and she ended up going some kind of program. I forget where, kibbutz or something like that. She meets this Israeli guy to get married, and she scored very high in some high school or college tests, and the Mossad came to interview and said, I guess we want you to work for us. And the husband was already working for them or something to that effect. And she signed up and took the course. Now she's a femme fatale. You understand? We need you for certain situations. And I don't know, for 10, 15 years she worked for the Mossad. And then she retired or quit and moved on, like I said before. So this is Cheryl Cheryl Bentov, who was pretty once upon a time. My friends, this is 1986. We all age over the years. Let's go to the next one. That's her today. Okay? And now she lives in Orlando. I kid you not. And right near Disney World. And she and her husband, they moved to Florida and they run some kind of a real estate operation. Okay? So, what did you do when you were young, Mom? Next question. Now, remember, Vanunu is no professional spy. Indeed, he's a sitting duck for any kind of a honey trap. He falls for her, hook, line, and sinker. You can just imagine what happened. Not wanting to abduct him from London, where he was, because Shimon Peres, let's go to the next one, so like this, don't mess me up with Thatcher. I can't have any Israeli kidnapping taking place on British soil. The most SLA is, all right, we'll find the country we don't care about, and we'll kidnap them there. So, Italy. Who cares about the Italians? Chabza and Bud. So she said like this, let's go for a romantic weekend to Rome. I have a friend with a condo over there. He's dumb enough to go with her. And as soon as he lands in Rome and goes to the apartment, I forget exactly how it happened, they jump him, they, drug him, they give him the shot, all this kind of stuff. And next thing you find yourself in Israel. Mamish exfiltrated like in a movie. The reason they showed us in the movies is because that's what happens in real life. He tried, let's go to the next one. He tried to show the reporters, look what he wrote in his hand as he was driven to his trial in Israel. I was kidnapped in Rome. You see the word Rome in there? And I have such and such a number, and I was hijacked in Rome. All the rest of it. Didn't matter. Once he came to Israel, he was tried in a security court, which means they set up a real court, and he did have a lawyer, all the rest of it, but it's closed to the public because it's going to reveal, sensitive national security information. I think we have that in this country. I believe we have national security courts. Obviously, because otherwise any spy can say, I'll blab it to the president, I'll have to let him go. So we have worked out in this country procedures in Israel also. I remember it was a small room, but they had real judges. So as we would say today, he did have a trial, and he had a real trial. But on the other hand, he did not deny that he broken his security, his secrecy contract. I mean, he didn't deny that he gave the info to the British and the newspapers, and so he got 18 years in jail. Now, you might say, I guess, that's a long time. Actually, now's the year 2020. For 18 years when he's in jail, maybe you can keep him quiet. You get it? When you're behind bars. So he won't tell. But what happened in 2004 when 18 years were up? He can still spill the beans. There's still stuff that perhaps was not included in the Sunday Times article. Remember, he worked in Dimona for years. Now, Israel does not know what to do. And my friends, Israel today, in the year 2020, does not know what to do. It's been a mess ever since. I'm not going to follow ups and downs, but, they try to make sure he doesn't leave the country, and then when he talks to foreign journalists, he's been arrested again, and I don't know where he is at this very moment. He's still under some form of arrest and surveillance and all the rest of it, because really, let's put it this way, if he dropped dead tomorrow, that would make Israel feel better. You understand? But they can't kill him. It's not Russia. It's not Syria. They can't kill him. See? It's part of the dilemma of the modern democratic state and the whistleblower or threat to national security. Notice, what do you do to the person? Now, by the way, if his information was all out of date, I don't think they would care. Obviously, his information is not all out of date. Now, as I know, that happened in the year 1986, but the plant, as you know, is still there. The base is still there underground in Dimona, and he's still capable of giving away a lot of junk. That's the problem. He knows too much. At the present time, today in the year 2020, there's a basic agreement between Vanunu and the state of Israel. Vanunu wishes Israel did not exist, and Israel wishes Vanunu did not exist. And that's the standoff. Now, what about his information? I don't know. Right? I've seen reports Israel has 100 nukes and stopped producing new ones in the year 2004. But who knows? Let's go to the next one. As Churchill said, particularly in these areas, in wartime, truth is so precious, she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. Anything I see in the press or on the internet regarding the Israel nuclear program, I know Israel's spinning it. I don't blame them. You understand? So we don't know. They have 100 nukes, maybe they have 1,000 nukes, maybe they have 2,000 nukes. You want to ask me a question, what does Israel need 1,000 H-bombs for? Blow the whole Middle East up. You get it? Yeah. Thomas Nafshin Polishim. I'm going to ask you a question. What happens if, as things unfortunately seem to be going, another year or 2 or 5 years or whenever Iran gets an A-bomb, an H-bomb. Then you have a nuclear standoff. So what do you do then? It's going to be used sooner or later. I hate to say it. Because they're nuts over there. You understand? And what does Israel do? So I would imagine they're saying, well, you got 1 or 2, we have 1,000. But, I have no idea. I'm not a Kissinger type to be able to work out these scenarios of what happened in, nuclear situations. There are specialists that try to do that. But it's impossible to second guess what will happen. I think tonight's talk demonstrates my contention, though, that the 1980s was very much a spy scandal era in Israeli history, But on the other hand, I think you all follow the news close enough to know that nowadays this stuff is going on in Iran, is it not? The Mossad is doing all this kind of business in Iran, and they bumped off that guy last week. And who knows whatever else is going on over there. But I think it's enough for tonight, don't you? In which case, I wish you a good tavach, and I'll see you, Mir Hashem, next week. I don't know.